Hello everyone, this is week 4 again. That month went quickly. Now slipping into August fairly soon. Today I'm demonstrating painting a hollyhock onto an already painted background. I'm going to show you first how I've laid down the background, then I will go on to actually painting the hollyhock. May have to stop and start because I don't quite know how long it's all going to take. I'm just going to sit and paint and enjoy it. I've chosen quite a strong colour for my subject, and I'm going to put down quite a pale background, so that's something to bear in mind, because if your background is too strong then it's quite difficult to paint over the top to get everything that you need in the way of lights and darks. I've got many hollyhocks in the garden, but this is really quite a pretty colour, and these are all the colours that I'm actually using, and these are the background colours and those are the colours that I'm putting into the flower. Okay, I'm going to use a large brush to paint the subject, but first of all I'm going to put the background down. I've used up some old paints for my background, some foreign paints that I've had, which is always, you know, quite a good idea if you've got to make large pools and things, to use your second best paints if you've got some that you need to use up. Mine are a little bit chalky, and so that's why I don't use them normally, but for a background it's absolutely fine. I've taped the edge, so although it is a block, taping the edge will actually ensure that it won't crinkle too much, and if it does it will straighten again. So I've got my spray, and I'm going to start off by spraying the whole of the background, whole of the paper for my background, and using lovely clean water with my brush. I'm going to use just 3 colours, a blue, a sort of pinky purple, and some yellow, which is a complementary colour to the purple. So hopefully when they blend together they're going to look quite nice. So make sure you've covered everywhere, and if you tip it a little bit like that you can see little dry patches that you might have left. Work the water into the paper and it will stay wet for long enough for you to actually add your background. Okay, so load your brush with your background colours, remembering that they will dry up lighter than when you apply, and don't worry if you've got a blue or a colour that granulates. It's just going to add interest into your work, so not a problem. I'm going to allow my pinky purple colour, which is similar to what I've got in the subject, so if in doubt as to what colours to use for your background, try either complementary colours that are close to on the colour wheel, or in fact colours that you see actually in your subject. And when they start to blend you're going to get more tones and varying colours mingling together and creating nice shapes for you. Okay, I'm going to go in again with the blue, which if it mingles with the yellow is going to create some green, which is something else that's obviously in my subject, and then back in with the purple at the bottom here. The bubbles are going to disappear, so I'll have to leave that now after giving it a little roll around. So what you need to do is to take your board, your pad, and just move it around a little bit and allow those colours to create nice shapes and to blend and mingle for you. There's a lovely grey, greeny grey appearing here, and a nice purple where the pinky colour is meeting the blue. So that will be really quite nice to work over. And I would suggest just leaving it, if you like what you see here now, leave it flat. If you want it to move around a little bit more, place something at the top there so that it's at an angle and it'll still move around. Whether that will be dry by the time I finish the tutorial, I don't know, but it will have changed anyway, so we'll have a look at it again then. But leave it to dry naturally rather than to put a hairdryer on it, I think. So then, when your background is dry and nice and level again, you can either draw over the top your subject, or you can just paint. And it's actually really nice painting over a already painted surface. It really does feel very nice. I'm going to start with my focal point because that's what I would suggest you do with your drawing or with your painting. So I'm going to have a go at putting the flowers in first and creating my focal point here. What I think I'll do also, just thought of this, is I'm going to actually just dot a little bit of water on, not everywhere, but just here and there, off a smaller brush so that I don't get too much, so that when I touch the water it's going to blend for me quite naturally without my having to do anything much. Right, so you can work wet on wet, as it's we're still painting loosely. So I've actually got some colour I don't use very often, is a permanent rose that I'm actually popping down first, so that when I put my quinacridone over the top, it's going to give me a lovely bright appearance. And my flower gets lighter in the centre here, and I've allowed it to blend there, so that's something I'm going to keep going throughout the picture, I think. Hollyhocks have 5 petals, but they do in fact overlap. And so you tend to, from a slight distance, only really see the overall shape. But I would suggest trying to see where the petals are and the edges of the petals and painting them individually rather than as a whole, because that way you'll get a better shape for your picture. It's tricky when you're outside because you're painting them in situ, because you just don't actually see the separation in the petals very well. So this opera rose is actually giving it a lovely bright appearance. Another time that I sometimes use the opera rose is if I've used a purple, and sometimes purple can be a little bit dulling. So when that happens, I sometimes just paint over the top with a little bit of opera rose, and that will then bring it back to life and give it a more lively appearance. I've left my pencil drawing quite sharp again, whereas normally I would have softened that, but I think it maybe helps you to see the pencil line, so I tend to leave it in when I'm doing this, but I'm not following my pencil line entirely all the time. Going to let that blend over here a little bit. So look out for your lights and darks. I'm sure some of you've got hollyhocks, but if you haven't, you'll probably find some photos on Pixabay, or maybe think of something else that you could paint. As we get further into the summer, the flowers tend to start looking a bit more sort of blousy, which suits the loose and free technique really well. So you'll probably find something else that would be suitable for this kind of technique. Right, I'm keeping it light where that petal folds over. Now I'm not going to see what I've got here until it's a bit drier. It's still quite wet. So I can go back and fix that up a little bit more when it's actually a little bit drier. But I actually can see a little bit of green going on here. So I'm just letting that float around. And my little centre here is yellow. Right, so I'll bring the shape of that up a little bit more later. Going on now to paint this little flower here that's only partly open. So I'm going to look out for any variation that I can see in the work. So that my subject doesn't look the same everywhere I go. Letting that flow a little bit. It's quite dark at the base here. So I took some of my drier paint to create a bit more depth. So try to be loose. It really suits this particular subject, painting loosely. Get that depth again, which is a contrast to this lighter area here. Don't be afraid to leave white paper as usual. Work in the direction that you see any markings on the actual flower. It's quite light in there, so I'm going to leave that light, and there's a little fold back here which I'll also leave quite light. But I like getting the depth on the outside of these petals here. That should dry up looking quite nice. Got a good point on this brush, which is helpful. Okay, just a little bit of a petal here, folded up. So that's a nice shape, that little bud. Little light area there. Right, I'm going to have to stop and paint a couple more of these flowers and then come back again. Okay, so I've washed some colour over the rest of the flowers, and I've popped a little bit of purple into this one, quinacridone violet, so that it gives a little bit of variety there. I now want to bring some definition back into that particular one. I see some red going on in here, a deeper sort of red, so I've got some of my carmine out and my dried quinacridone magenta. So I'm actually going to now try to bring some definition out into the focal area here without, you know, getting too detailed with it, but just defining the petals a little bit more, using wet on wet and softening the edges. Some of the petals get very dark at the edges, some of the petals are very light at the edges. So look out for little differences like that when you've got something that's got petals that are not that defined. There'll be lots of shadow under there, so maybe a little tiny touch of purple as well, just to bring out a nice deep shadow underneath that fold. And then soften it down, because they tend to stay quite light around the centres. I often turn my book around when I'm painting, but I don't do it when I'm demonstrating, obviously. But you may find it easier to do that. There are lots of little sort of stripy effects going on, but I tend not to put too much of that detail in, but while it's still damp you could just indicate a little bit of that. If you overdid it, it would look wrong. Okay. Brought some light back in there by putting the depth in, I think, which is good. There's a very dark sort of folded area here. So I think that one's now taken on quite a bit more shape, which is what I was hoping for, because it's in a prominent area. I'm not going to go into putting too many stripy bits in. We're not painting that way really at the moment. But just indicating it in the focal area so that the viewer has some idea of what details the actual flower does normally have. Okay, and I've dropped water back on here and there to give it a more crinkly effect. And I've tried to make that one look as if it's just showing its back edge. Now let's think about some greenery. I'll start some, stop, finish off so you can see the whole thing finished off. These little buds at the top here are quite a bluey green, which are very nice. Nice shapes to paint. And I can let some of that background colour show through. So vary those a little bit and indicate the fact that there are different little leaf shapes folding one over the top of another. I might go on to a bit smaller brush for that. It's holding rather a lot of water for a small area. So I'm letting the light in to create the shapes rather than having to paint each individual little sort of shape that I see within the bud. And they've got, each one seems to have a little, indicate a few more of those, little leaves. Might just let that float away a little bit through the top of the page. When painting something that is really long and goes on forever, like a hollyhock, it's quite nice sometimes to have it coming in at the top and out of the bottom. So that tells the viewer that there's more to this plant and that it goes on. So that's another way of painting one of these if you get hold of one. Well, this is quite quick. Stalk is a bit fairy looking, so dropping water back onto that might give that effect. I'll just do these leaves that are sitting around this half-opened one. Then I'll do a big leaf, stop, finish off some more and come back again. So I'm trying to vary my green as much as I can without getting too patchwork. Saves creating monotony. Right, okay. Let's do one of these larger leaves here. I'll work wet on wet a bit, I think, with that. And they're very scruffy looking. And they've got holes and spots and all sorts of things going on, so don't be fussy with those, just drop the colour in. Let it move around, mingle a bit. A little greener this time rather than blue. Nice shapes though. And there's variety in them, so it goes off behind there. So I'm working in the direction that I see the marks and things and the way the thing sits. Dropping a bit of paint back on. Dropping a bit of water back on. So that's going to give it a crunchy, textured effect without having to touch it too much and work hard on it. So let's see how that dries up. I'll do some more and come back. Right, I've completed the leaves. I think they're looking a little bit fleshy. I haven't put too much work into them, and I have dropped other colours and lots of water back onto them because they need not to take over. They can be quite large and bold and could take over if you're not careful. It's dried up reasonably well. I think one thing I would do now, because it is quite a shabby looking plant in a way, it's not, I don't know that it lends itself that well to painting. It's fairly insignificant. They look really good outside, and I think the beauty is in the height, which of course you don't get on a small piece like this. But I think if I did a bit of this, it would give it a little bit more interest and a little bit of depth. You see all sorts of bits and pieces going on in them. Well, on ours we do anyway. And a little bit of green on the leaves would maybe make it look nice. So when that's dry, or actually if you don't want it to be too precise, just now over the top splatter some water to soften some of those splatters that have just gone down as a hard splatter. But I think that's not a bad thing to have done. And what's happening now is those little splatters are actually running in the water and creating some nice marks. So actually I'm going to do a little bit more of that just down one side. It's going to loosen it up in an easy way, and let's see what we get when it's dry. You never know what you're going to get till it's dry. So let me show you closer, and you can see now what those little splatters are actually doing. Okay, so I think I've created it a little bit pinker than the actual subject, but that doesn't matter a bit. Put that to one side. My original background is drying up, but it's still really damp and it's still not flat, but I'm pleased with the result. It's blended but not too much, and it actually has made some very nice colours here. So I hope you have fun with that. What would be good would be to, hang on, I'm about to push things off the edge of the table again. Would be to use your long pad if you have one, because as I said, I think the beauty is in the length and the height, and I wouldn't have the space on the table to do that as a demonstration, but maybe you might want to paint a nice tall one. Okay, so that's one I did earlier. Another one I did earlier with pushing, we did poppies last week. The background of this one went down first, and if you want to paint poppies again, give it a nice warm background. Yellows are quite good to paint over the top because you see a lot of yellow in a poppy anyway. And of course the red and the green always looks good, so put some green into your background as well. So create a nice background for whatever you paint this week. Use a nice large brush for most of it and create lovely loose effects, and it hopefully will suit the flower that you're painting. Next week I'm going to paint a white flower, and we will be in a new set, but I'm going to paint a white flower and continue with some more interesting techniques in the background. For this one I actually used blues that actually granulate and some purples that granulate, and dropped salt on the top when it was really, really wet. And so I didn't get the effects that the salt normally makes, but it looked textured. So we'll try some different techniques next week with the backgrounds, okay? So have a lovely week, and I'll see you next time. Bye.